8.4 Uses and misuses of data. So the goal here is to see how data can be distorted to impact the way it is interpreted and thus influence the perception of data. So as you know already from the past topics, that you can display data in many different ways. So you can display them in a graph, table of values, scatter plots, bar graphs, histograms, many different kinds of plots. Now, sometimes data can be deliberately distorted to make an argument more convincing. And the media often sensationalizes data to generate public interest. Even think about advertising agencies would also manipulate data to illustrate a certain bias, sell their product, whatever the case may be. So how you choose to display data can have a significant impact on how a reader is likely to interpret that data. Okay, so how can it be distorted? Well, it can be influenced by the bias in the wording, misrepresentation of the graphical data, inadequate data collection, or very poor analysis in general. So let's have a look at an example. So example 1 is fighting in hockey on its way out in the NHL. The graph and table illustrate the total number of fights per season in NHL hockey games over time. So let's try and look at a few different sources of bias in the graph and table that they present here. So look at the graph. It says fighting in pro hockey rapidly disappearing. Number of fights in the season from 2008 all the way to 2013. So I've created a little table here to help us determine where can we find these distortions or biases. So let's look at the title. So, fighting in pro hockey rapidly disappearing. Okay, right away you can see it's kind of skewed to one point of view. It's not very neutral at all. So the language, it's not neutral. So you can say that here as part of explanation. So the language. The language is not neutral. Okay, that's the first thing. So what would the intended effect could be? Well, because you're trying to perhaps prove to people that fighting is on the decline. So the sport might be safer than what other people are claiming to be. So the intended effect would be to convince that fighting is on the decline. Okay. Let's look at another reason. Let's change the color here. Let me see if I can. Okay. So let's look at the vertical scale. Vertical scale goes from 300 to 800. It does not start at 0. So what's happening here? I'm going to say here, scale does not start at 0. So what's happening if you don't start at 0? Well, you are exaggerating the distance between this uppermost point and this lowermost point. Because if you had started this from 0 and evenly drawn your scale, then this whole thing would be much shorter. So now by changing that scale, you're exaggerating the difference between those points for a much more dramatic effect. So you're exaggerating the downward trend. Okay. What about the outlier at 2012 and 2013? This is a huge outlier down here. And there's a big reason historical reason. They're not even talking about here in the presentation of the data. There were only 720 games played. So if you may have missed it very easily here. 12:30. Well, what happened to this season over here? Well, there was a strike. Okay, so there's this hidden variable, a strike, that would have caused a huge drop in the number of fights. Because if there weren't as many games, then of course there wouldn't be as many fights. So they're trying to hide the trend is less extreme. Sorry, they're trying to exaggerate again the downward trend uh, due to this one thing out here that's saying that there was a strike. Okay, so only 720 games were played. Due to a strike. So we're going to say that there's a hidden variable. Okay, and again, it's to exaggerate the downward trend. And finally, the sample size. Well, you only included 5 seasons. Is that a big enough sample size? No. Okay, it's again to hide the fact that the trend is less extreme over a period of time. So we need to uh, include more data. All right. So how do you present the data in an unbiased way? Okay, so we're going to present this a little bit differently. So if you remove the outlier, things look a little bit more different. So you don't have that 2013 season. So we have removed 2012 to 2013, and it changes the perception. It's no longer a dramatic drop, but now you have some kind of up and down, and then back up and down again. There's nothing suggesting that there's a complete drop over a long period of time right now. Okay, so you increase the sample size by including more years, so you see more of the trend over time. The scale is fixed, so it starts from 0 and the scale goes up evenly, so there is less exaggeration between the change between years. Okay, and if you get rid of the title, you keep your viewer or your reader from leading them to a certain biased opinion, so they can come up with their own judgment. So this graph here better illustrates the data in an unbiased way, while there still tends to be a slight downward trend, overall. If you look at the overall, going from up here to down here, over that long period of time, it tends to be more gradual than it was originally presented. So there's very little to suggest that fighting within the NHL will be disappearing anytime soon. So there might be a little bit of a decrease, but it's very gradual rather than a steep drop. And that will stop my example on misuses of data for this lesson.